Hey folks, thanks for checking out. I'm pretty sure this is going to be the last video of 2019. I thought the one before Christmas was going to be the last video of 2019, and then the Brianna Wu thing happened, and I thought that would be the last video. And it actually occurred to me today, seeing, well, I clicked on it to save it to my YouTube history, but I haven't watched it yet. I think it was Jim Sterling's crappiest games of 2019, and it got me thinking, what would be my games of the decade? Now, these are games that resonated with me from 2010 to 2019, not necessarily critically acclaimed games or super popular games and everything. There's going to be stuff on this list that you've probably never heard of. But I just thought I would actually go ahead and kind of do a retrospective of my decade in gaming and talk about the things that kind of really hit me over the last 9-10 years or so. So first, starting off, we're going to go and dip into the Xbox 360 era, and I'm going to say Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2. Now, 13 was borderline not in the decade. It came out in very late 2009, but it was still a very active game for people when the decade hit, so I'm going to consider it. And then 13-2 was very clearly in the decade. Not one of the most critically acclaimed set of Final Fantasy games, admittedly. And even, 13 was very linear in the beginning. A lot of people didn't like it. 13-2 was considered odd by people, but timey-wimey bullshit, universe hopping, timeline hopping stuff, that all resonates with me, probably because of my love for Chrono Cross. So 13-2 I loved. And another thing that is a box check for me in 13.2 is the fact that you could have creatures as your third party member. Now, sometimes they weren't creatures, they were people like Lightning, for example. Lightning showed up and was a creature in 13.2, but anytime I get to have something very non-standard as part of my party in a game. For example, in Final Fantasy Tactics, when you get creatures like the Chocobos and the Bibeloses and all of the other goblins, and anytime you can add something really strange to your party, I love it. And a somewhat similar touch to that is when you do real-time strategy games like the Command & Conquer series, and you send your engineer into an enemy building, and then it's yours, and now you're producing enemy units along with... I don't know what it is. I love that. That whole, I'm not supposed to do this, but I can do this kind of a thing. Like doing hand... I think hand was the red guys. Doing like hand building and hand tanks and everything with the Nod, or no, Nod were the good guys. Excuse me, wait a minute. Nod were the red and they were the bad guys, and the GDI were the good guys. So, having access to like Nod units when you're playing GDI, I love it. I don't know why, but like the Ordos mind control gas in the Dune series, or the Infestors and StarCraft and things like that, it just gets me. So 13.2, having monsters, I kind of find it similar to that. So it just gets me, and I truly do enjoy those two games, especially 13.2. I completed both of those, did a lot of the DLC arena battles in 13.2 and fought crazy bosses in there, got characters like Lightning and everything. So the next one that I want to talk about, still on the Xbox 360, is the Dead Space series. Now, Dead Space 1 doesn't fit in the decade, but 2 and 3 do. Now, 3 was kind of much maligned in public. People were very, very scared 3 was going to get too action-y and not scary enough, and then there was the microtransactions. I love both. Both of them do it for me. I played through 3 multiple times, actually. Dead Space, rest in pickles, the Dead Space series and Visceral Games, and a double fuck you to EA for killing that studio, but I loved the Dead Space games, and 2 and 3, definitely games of the decade for me. Also, the Borderlands series on the Xbox 360. Now, 1, again, very, very close to the turn of the decade, but Borderlands 2 and now Borderlands 3 firmly within the decade. So we opened the decade with it, we closed it. I'm not going to talk about pre-sequel that much. Pre-sequel, worst of the series, if you ask me. And admittedly, I didn't play Tales. I have a good friend who played Tales, did like it, did like how it fleshed out the characters, and it does help a little bit if you have done Tales when you go into 3, but I don't think it's as much of a necessity as having played 2. 2 is the high point for me. The DLCs were great. I mean, we still got to give 3 time, and I have the DLC for 3, but haven't played it yet because I just beat Tyrene last night. Destroyer Tyrene last night, as a matter of fact. So, got that in before the decade wrapped up. 2's DLCs, I mean, Scarlet Booty was the best opening DLC you can imagine. That was a really good DLC, and definitely one of the ultimate one to open up the game's DLCs with. Assault on Tiny Tina's Keep was phenomenal. Torque's Campaign of Carnage. I mean, Torque is a great character. Respecting women is great. Like, he's just very surprising, and he's also very funny. Not Tiny Tina funny, but he's funny in his own right. The Hammerlock is, I would say, probably 3rd place for me, behind Tiny Tina's number 1, Scarlet Booty as number 2, Hammerlock as number 3, and then finally Campaign of Carnage is the last. Nothing wrong with Mr. Torque, it's just that DLC probably didn't resonate with me quite as well as the others did. And Assault on Dragon Keep is just hysterical. I kind of like the way it blasts open the RPG tropes and the MMO RPG player tropes and everything. Still on the Xbox, we have Halo Reach, which you can now get on Steam as the whole Master Chief package. Reach and ODST were a lot of fun. Played that with friends, co-op at times. If you've not done that game, definitely go ahead and get it on Steam. Speaking of somewhat similar games, now going to touch on Overwatch. You're going to find a lot of Blizzard games are going to make this list. I totally admit that. I'm not a Blizzard fanboy, but I'm a Blizzard player, so just be prepared for it. Yeah, Overwatch. Overwatch has been a near daily game for me since the beginning. Certainly several times a week, if it isn't necessarily daily. However, there's been a lot of events lately since Halloween where if you get 9 wins in a week, you get a skin or something like that. Although, I just got the Mercy skin last night and was like, wow, it's not even that good. It's nice to say I've done it and I've gotten it out of the way and I can pack that up in my trunk, but it's a shitty skin. But anyway, yeah, still very much an Overwatch player. Girlfriend used to be, so her name's Ori Kalk, and I'll just refer to her as Ori for the rest of this video because she will come up quite a bit. Major Widowmaker in the game, played several competitive seasons coming from a very competitive TF2 background. It's not daily for her anymore. She's gotten a little bit disillusioned with it. I still play it because when I want to shoot something and I want to have it be meaningful for me, not meaningful for the game, Overwatch is where I go. Paladins is another game for me that I'm going to mention. However, Paladins has dropped off my radar in the last several months. Not really an active Paladins player anymore since the late summer when I got this PC up and running. I brought Paladins over, but it doesn't really launch properly when I just copied it, and I've never bothered to fix it or reinstall it, but I used to cover Paladins a lot on the channel. I've been with it since the early beta, and have always kept up with it, and the new heroes and everything, I just have fallen out of it lately. Not to say that I would never go back, I just haven't. So up next, Diablo 3. So Diablo 3 is probably one of the least impactful games of the decade for me now, but when it released I really did consume the story, and then when the DLC came out, not much of a co-op player in it, not a seasoned player, but I did play the plot as my demon hunter and then a little bit on a monk. I do really like the game when I was actively playing it, and I still occasionally, several times a month, go back to it and play it. Very much looking forward to Diablo 4. As a matter of fact, if I can divulge from the games of the decade for just a moment, trailers of the decade, I really have to say the ones that spring to mind are the Diablo 4 trailer with Lilith, the Hellblade or the Senua 2 trailer. I have to watch that trailer every several days because I love that trailer. And believe it or not, the World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth trailer, when Sylvanas goes absolutely apeshit with the Banshee Scream, I would get chills every time I watched that video, no matter how much I watched it. Not necessarily now, because Sylvanas is a twat, but those are probably like my trailers of the decade. I can't necessarily remember earlier trailers. I would say the Agony trailer was very good, but the game was a dud. The Agony trailer definitely made me want to play it, but it was kind of a fart. So, back to a good game, unlike Agony, Alien Isolation. Alien games needed to knock it out of the park after the absolute shitbuckle that was Aliens Colonial Marines. As a matter of fact, right around the time of Colonial Marines, Borderlands 2 was coming out, I was like, oh my god, which one did I pre-order? I hope it's not Colonial Marines, because that one's tanking. And it wound up being Borderlands 2, and I was like, dodged a bullet there. Can you believe the great fix for Aliens Colonial Marines was one line of code? It was just like a couple of spelling mistakes, and now the game actually works? The fuck, Gearbox? But anyway, Alien Isolation was an amazing game. It brings the Alien series back to good realms. If you've never played it, great tense game, not horror, super tense. I mean, a game that would have been great with some very big DLC. It is one of those games during the decade that I had to like. I came home from work, I had to play that game. I had to get my fix just about every day when that was an active game for me. Similar to Borderlands 2. When I was playing through expansion packs or the main story, I really had to play Borderlands 2 almost daily. I was that into it. Dead Space, those were other games where I really had to play them daily when it dropped. In terms of another I need to play daily game, Bloodborne. Bloodborne was my first of the Dark Souls-esque games. When it came to 1, 2, and 3, I was never really into them. I knew the meme, you died, whoa. And I was like, being hip, not falling for the Dark Souls pull. Like, I was like, haha, you're not gonna get me, Dark Souls. No. Why do I want to play a game where I just want to slam my dick in the cabinet door all the time? But Bloodborne, when I got my PlayStation 4, I did play, and I got good at it, and I beat the game, but I didn't beat the DLC. I still have Orphan of Kos as my only unkilled boss. And some of the Chalice dungeons that I haven't been in yet. But Bloodborne is a phenomenal game. Even though Dark Souls 3 comes after it, I think Bloodborne helps usher in the Dark Souls-esque formula to some of the more modern games. It's like a bridge. And I will say I have to throw an honorable mention at Sekiro. I'm maybe halfway through it or so. Little similar to Neo, it's sort of an impasse boss in it. And I will say that I can definitely give it a Game of the Decade rank for me because of its quality. I just need to spend more time with Sekiro the way that I did with Bloodborne. So, going on from there, the Titanfall series. Here's where EA gets a good one. Titanfall 1 and 2, of course, were very different, whereas 2 was very plot. 1 was multiplayer only, and myself and Ori enjoyed Titanfall 1's multiplayer. I liked my pilot kit. I liked my Titan kit. It was the first game that I saw really bringing back some of my old UT players. The movement in that game was so good with the pilot and the wall running. It really brought back some of the fast-paced action that me and my UT compatriots, Unreal Tournament compatriots, were used to, that you just couldn't get in a Team Fortress 2 and, hero shooters and everything like that. And then, of course, here comes Titanfall 2, which does have a very good plot, a very good single-player campaign. I couldn't get into the multiplayer that much because I was one of those people who had the Titanfall 2 audio bug, where even though my computer was able to handle the game and I was getting good FPS, my sound would be all like scratchy, and when a lot of things were happening on the screen, the game acted like it was lagging, but I had no controller lag, well, mouse and keyboard lag. I had no video lag, my FPS was good. It just was really weird with the sound, and I could get it to a point where it was okay for the single player, and I was willing to struggle with it to do the plot, which was good. I was not willing to do it for the PvP. So I didn't get into Titanfall 2 PvP. I could reinstall it now, and it probably wouldn't give me that kind of a trouble on this computer. And, there's Apex Legends, which is, essentially Titanfall 2 without the mechs. But, yeah, sadly, I think my Titanfall 2 thing ended on the old PC. I'm not really going to reinstall that just for the multiplayer, where probably the multiplayer isn't even that populated at this time. BioShock Infinite. I can't say the BioShock series because they're mostly not in this decade, but BioShock Infinite was a big game for me on the 360. However, something weird happened where I got into the level where the bank was, or the vault, and I don't know if it was save corruption or what, but my game went crazy. I had graphical glitches. It would take me 5 minutes to open something. I had to stop playing it, and I even tried to, wipe the data off but keep the save and put it back. I never really got to finish the game, but I know the game is good, and I had a lot of fun with it, just the same way I did the original BioShock, and would you kindly agree with me? But, yeah, I couldn't progress past a certain point of the game, because I don't know if it was CD corruption or something. The game just went unplayable for me. Doom 2016. Doom 2016 was a great game. Some of us Doom purists had some issues with the game in that the maps tended to be very convoluted, and seeing the map on the screen with its multi-layers, and you're like, which layer, which slice am I looking at? And the fact that it was kind of rape you room, boring corridor, rape you room, boring corridor, spawny rapey room, boring that was a little jarring for, us Doom purists that is used to staggered amounts of action throughout the entire game. It still was good, though. Don't get me wrong, it still was very good, and Doom Eternal is a game I'm looking forward to in the next year. My overall, it's time to say this, even though it could be the end of the video, but really I'm just doing things as they come. My game, quote unquote, of the decade still is World of Warcraft. Two expansions I'm going to mention here, because not all of them in the past 9 or 10 years were worth mentioning, but two of them were, and that was Cataclysm at the beginning of the decade and Legion a couple years back. So we had Cata, Mists of Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, Legion, and Biffa, Battle for Azeroth, all in this decade. Cataclysm represents the end of WoW's second block. So to me, the original block is Vanilla and TBC, and then you have the Wrath block, which is Wrath and Cata. Mop could kind of be its own little thing as a bridge, but I'll say Mop and WoD is its own block, and then Legion and Biffa are the modern block. I can't mention Mists of Pandaria as an expansion of the decade for me, because it was a hateful expansion for me. I had a group in the guild that was harder core than the rest of us, so that split us up. It was a little bit of drama. Thematically, I got done with Mop very, very quickly. I just was tired of Mop's theme very, very early on, so it was a very, very shitty expansion for me. Warlords, not necessarily a shitty expansion for me. It was a shitty expansion for everybody. Warlords was the only one where my guild just went and hit the off switch. We got up to the last tier. We did it on normal. We were going through it on heroic, and we all just went and logged out and just stopped. It was good for me because it enabled me to do a lot of Marvel Avengers Alliance stuff at the time unfettered. Wasn't working, wasn't raiding several days a week, so I was able to play MAA when I wanted, stream it, videos, weekly stuff, daily stuff. Cosmically, everything was good, and it proved to me that I could do without WoW on a daily or multiple weekly basis and not feel like I had a giant gaping sucking chest wound in me to not have WoW on a particular night. Like, I was fine, and it tells me that if I ever want to stop WoW, I can. I don't want to when the guild is going strong and active content and it's considered a reasonable expansion, but if for some reason I have to stop, WoD proved to me that I can just boom, log out, walk away. And I also got to do a lot of Heroes of the Storm at that time with Ori, so I didn't mind not doing WoW during that phase. And I mean, I still was. I was leveling my Warlock a little bit, but I wasn't actively raiding, and the guild was not active. Along those lines, I'm going to throw a nod to Rift. Rift was the only MMO RPG out there that I actually paid for a little. So I paid for SWTOR and WildStar for a bit, but they both flushed relatively quickly. SWTOR was the quickest of the flushes. WildStar was doing it with Ori, but then got hacked, and they didn't recover my hack very cleanly. Unlike World of Warcraft, anytime I've had an issue there, I've had amazing service from them. WildStar, NC stuff, once I got hacked and they didn't fully restore me with everything that I had, and it was not fun, so I was like, that's it, I was done with WildStar. SWTOR just didn't like the game that much. I felt it relied too much on getting groups together, and just I liked the beta, but then when it went live, I didn't stick with it. Rift, however, I went all the way to the max level of Vanilla Rift, even got into a guild, was just about ready to start raiding in Rift when Looking for Raid dropped back in the Cataclysm era, and I was like, oh, you mean I can tackle all my characters without having to try and shoehorn them into a guild raid? Yep, and then that's when I stopped paying the $9.99 for Rift, but I did go back and play it in its free-to-play era when Ori decided to pick it up with some friends, and my max level character went and hung out with her and her friends that were newbies in Rift. So I had two very distinct Rift periods. I love the talent tree in that game, the tree with the roots and everything like that. It had its pretty moments and everything. So Rift was probably the only MMO outside of WoW that I really ever gave more than 13 seconds of the time of day. Speaking of Blizzard stuff, Heroes of the Storm. Heroes of the Storm is the only MOBA that I've ever really dove into. I sort of tried out Paragon a little bit, and then that DC Infinite Crisis, I think it was. Heroes of the Storm is dumbed down enough that it's the only MOBA that I play. Screw League of Legends and its toxic-ass community and crazy characters and everything like that. Not for me. Heroes of the Storm is primo for me. It's now in its not maintenance mode, but it's in a slowed down development mode. Still play it. Played it last night. Like Deathwing. Still a very, very big game for me, even though Ori doesn't play it anymore, or most of my other friends. Another game that I'm going to mention here, and it'll come back around for the graveyard sequence of this, Blacklight Retribution. Blacklight Retribution was a shooter from Perfect World and Heartsuit Labs, or I think it was Zombie. It's changed hands a little bit. I loved Blacklight Retribution. Never touched a Call of Duty. Only touched one Battlefield game. That was Battlefield 3 in 2011 when my grandfather passed away. I wanted to jump into a game that I never ever touched any semblance of because I wanted it to so distract me just in case I needed it. BLR people called a COD or Call of Duty style shooter. Ori referenced it as that. She joined me in the game for a little while. I missed Blacklight Retribution. I really did like that game. It started to go through some changes that sort of ruined it at the end. High pingers, South Americans, were terrible in that game, unfortunately, because high ping tended to favor them, as they would kind of like lag through your shots, and then all of a sudden you're getting killed by people you didn't think were on your screen. But Blacklight Retribution and its community for a little while, I really did like. I think that was 2013, 2014-ish. Vindictus. Vindictus was another free-to-play game that I really liked. And again, got to do that one with Ori. We had a lot of fun in that. I forget what characters I had in it. I think eventually I end up starting an Eevee, and then I can't remember if I was the double sword. I think I was the double sword, one of the original characters in that. I don't remember if that was a Lan or Van or something like that. But anyway, Vindictus was certainly fun for a while. Now getting on to some of the non-big console games like PC and console. Starting to talk about some of the mobile and Facebook games. Marvel Avengers Alliance. That definitely deserves a place on this list, and a very high place on this list. It existed for 4 years, and it is how most of you who are viewing this today are probably here because of that Marvel Avengers Alliance period. Incredibly fun game for the years that it existed. It definitely, you're going to hear about it in the graveyard period of this. it was my number one biggest secondary game. So I consider main PC games, main console games, as my essentially slot number one games. Mobile games, Facebook games are my slot number two. They're ones that I maybe do on this computer over here while I'm doing main gaming over here. Marvel Avengers Alliance was the biggest slot 2 game for me out of everything. And I'm so happy to be part of the team that's bringing it back as Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux. Will it get that number one slot again, especially when it has a potential to be even higher with the fact that you may not run out of energy as much? Yeah, I really hope so. I hope it gets to that point where it is as playable as Marvel Avengers Alliance number one is. And I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to getting back on a video train with, doing videos of characters and synergies and gear. I really can't wait. That is something that will really make my 2020 if I can start doing those videos again with that frequency that I did when it was live. Gotta throw a nod to Farmville and Cafe World, because if I wasn't doing them as much around the turn of the decade on Facebook, I might not have ever stumbled upon Marvel Avengers Alliance. So they deserve a bit of a nod, and the three of them probably combined for my biggest Facebook games ever. I literally, there is no game now that I play on Facebook other than Words with Friends, and that's against my own mother. We're both very English dictionary-oriented people, so it's fun, and it's very competitive between the two of us, but that's it. I mean, there's nothing that I continue to play on Facebook other than Words with Friends. As far as mobile games, you just saw me playing FERC, or Final Fantasy Record Keeper. Very big mobile game for me in this decade. I love the fact that I can combine Final Fantasy characters from everywhere, the customization systems, the gear with soul breaks and everything like that. You saw my party had like a Sephiroth, but then the werewolf guy, but Tifa. That is a very much gotta catch 'em all game, and then gotta equip them all game. One of my biggest mobile games of the decade. Fallout Shelter is one of the most honest mobile games of the decade. You don't have to spend hardly anything in Fallout Shelter to have fun with it. So that is my favorite monetization of the decade in a mobile game, whereas Marvel Contest of Champions is the worst. So that's not even going to get mentioned. Aside from Fallout Shelter, you'll see here, these are kind of still my big ones. Marvel Strike Force, DC Legends, Looney Tunes is probably going to be on the way out, and it's new enough that I'm not going to mention it, and it's probably going to die soon, so I'm not going to mention it. There's a missing one, Another Eden, which is by the Chrono series of people from Square. Great mobile game, high quality graphics and everything. Not much monetization in it. Another Eden is a superb mobile game. So that's pretty much it for me for the mobile games of the decade. There's some that I tried and am quite happy to be done with, like the Titanfall mobile game and South Park Phone Destroyer. I thought those were very greedy games, and I flushed them. I mean, Marvel Strike Force is greedy, let's be honest, but it's a Marvel game, so it's fun. Now, on to just a few more console games, and then we'll get into the graveyard, and I'll wrap it up. Marvel's Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4. Great game. Need to play it more. I have a game going in it. Ori's got a game going in it. This is gonna... Yeah, I need this. I'm gonna cut off my own picture for a little bit here. The reason why the camera's there and getting cut off is because of the fact that the NVIDIA control panel cannot see this Razer Kaio camera, so how I have to get around it is to open a camera window and do it that way. We'll throw Winter Soldier in there. That's a standard team. So, I'm going to have to throw Strike Force in there as a game. Clearly. Even though, again, it's relatively new, it's there. So, back to the console games. Spider-Man was definitely one of them. Dad of War, or the most recent God of War, is another one that I would throw as a high point game of the decade for me. I do need to play it more and get further along. Other things have come up. None on the console, but Skyrim is a game worth mentioning for the PC. That really was some of the cream of the crop of the storytelling of that type of genre, like Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Skyrim. Cultural phenomenon. You can't go through the decade without thinking of taking an arrow to the knee. And Fuss Roda have become memes. Definitely belongs on the list. On my NDS, the only one that I could really think of is the recent Metroid 2. I can't honestly think of that many games in the decade on the NDS consoles that I can really say are huge games of the decade for me. Pokemon Heart Gold. My girlfriend got me into that, and that was a pretty big game for me at the time. So I could say that one makes an impact, but the most recent Metroid, which is a re-release, that one belongs up there. On the Switch, Momodora, Revere Under the Moonlight, great little anime game, very, very good Metroidvania. Interesting that it had its own hard mode to a degree, where if you did a boss without getting hit, you got additional rewards, so you sort of had a built-in heroic mode or hard mode there. It was fun. You had a lot of backtracking, a lot of things where this ability or this weapon opens up a new area. It's exactly what you want in a Metroidvania. But to me, and this is the last one I mentioned before the Graveyard, as an indie game, if you want to talk about ultimate Metroidvanias, I think you cannot get in the decade better than... Where are you? This. Axial Verge. Axial Verge is an amazing Metroidvania. If you think the Metroid that was on the Super Nintendo is the greatest thing since sliced white bread, or the greatest thing since a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then I'm telling you, Axial Verge is for you. The plot is phenomenal, the weapons, the worlds, the backtracking, the way the plot kind of sneaks up on you and swerves. Axial Verge is so good, and when you think that one guy basically worked on Axial Verge alone, it's even more better and more respectable. So I cannot recommend Axial Verge enough to you guys. Really worth the pickup, whether you get it on the PS4 or you get it on Steam and everything. If you are a Metroidvania fan, get Axial Verge. Seriously, get it today. After you're done with this video, go to Steam and purchase it. If you have a Switch, Momodoro, yeah, you can't go wrong with that, but I would say Axial Verge is first. I know there were other ones in the genre that I consider good, like Ori and the Blind Forest and things like that, maybe even Iconoclasts, but I don't have experience with those, but Axial Verge I do, and Axial Verge is great. So finally, I'm going to come up to the saddest part of this video, and that is the graveyard of the decade. What games came and went in the decade that make me the saddest? Well, obviously, the big guy, Marvel Avengers Alliance 1, and honestly, Marvel Avengers Alliance 2, but not Marvel Avengers Alliance Tactics. Fuck Tactics. Dirty little shit game that was. Marvel Avengers Alliance 1 is probably the most gut-wrenching graveyard entry in this. It took the soul away from its fan base. And there was a very devoted fan base when the game died. I think it is probably the most hurtful one on here to lose. And again, so happy that we have people working on bringing it back, and not just bringing it back the way that it was when it died, but bringing it back and then continuing to expand on it and take it further. So it's not really a graveyard, but yeah, it is. Evolve on Steam. Evolve was a very fun and unique game at the time. The asymmetrical shooter where it was a team versus a monster and a monster versus a team. I had a lot of fun in it. I really enjoyed watching a streamer at the time named Sacriel, but only when he was playing that. I found him to be informative, although a friend's like, he's sometimes arrogant and an ass. But I like watching him play Evolve. I feel like I learned from him and got better. And Evolve was definitely fun when it lasted. I enjoyed being one of the hunters more than I liked being a creature. But through Sacriel, I felt I was a better creature than I could have been just by picking up some tactics from him. It was a purchase game, and then it went free to play, which somewhat revitalized it, but then, it unfortunately died again. I think it's still out there in a sort of limbo maintenance-y mode. Don't really know what can be said about Evolve now, but it was certainly fun at the time. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, in the graveyard is Blacklight Retribution. Had a lot of fun on that game. Wish that was still around. I would play it. I would play it to this day, even with like Overwatch and everything. I would play Blacklight Retribution. A game that nobody's watching this has probably ever heard of, Black Prophecy, is in the graveyard of the decade for me. So, way back in the late 90s, there was a run of games called Free Space 1 and 2. It was set in the Descent universe of Descent 1, 2, and 3, the Doom in space, the Rise of the Triad in space, Duke Nukem in space. And as a matter of fact, kind of the ship you pilot in the Descent game sort of makes its way into the Space Sim Free Space 1 and 2, and then Starlancer, and then Free Space. Those 4 games were phenomenal space sims at the time. I loved them all. Beat them all, played them all excessively, had a joystick that had a nice little speed control on it and everything that I used for it. I loved those space sims. So here comes Black Prophecy as a free-to-play MMO version of those games. And I played the beta, covered it on the channel. Unfortunately, never made it really past the beta, and it had a little bit of an issue where once you got out of the newbie zones and had that newbie protection, you were sort of fodder in those PvP areas for very established and very talented people that kind of made it hard to exist. You got ganked and griefed a lot once you got out of the starter areas in that game, which was a bit of a shame, but Black Prophecy could have had a lot of potential if you were into the space sims of the late 90s. Another graveyard free-to-play game, Nosgoth from Sony. So Nosgoth was set in the Legacy of Kain universe, a universe that I wasn't really that familiar with, but I got into the beta of Nosgoth, which is essentially vampire hunters versus vampires, different kinds of hunters, different kind of vampires, and everything like that. And it was a fun beta up until, again, the newbie protection wears off. Once you got out of those servers that were specifically only, levels 1 through 10, and then you were out there in the wild, the matchmaking wasn't good enough to get some really appropriate skill versus skill, similar skill combat. So you had a hard time getting into matches, you had a hard time getting into fair matches, and then the beta just kind of ran out of money, had issues with its monetization, and it failed. So Nosgoth died, and that was a fun one. Lawbreakers by Boss Key Studios. So Lawbreakers, much like Titanfall, brought back the really heavy movement of the late 90s Quake and Unreal Tournament arena style shooters. That's what it was. Whereas Black Prophecy had a nostalgia kick for me because of the genre that it was part of. Lawbreakers had nostalgia with me because it was a Cliffy B vehicle. Cliffy B was part of Epic at the time in which Unreal Tournament 99 and Unreal Tournament 2K4 were such major parts of my life. Like, before there was WoW, there was the Unreal Tournament games for me. So knowing that Cliffy B came out of retirement for that game really drew me into it. It was fun. The game itself was great, but Cliffy just got arrogant in his interviews. He kind of rubbed people the wrong way. He tried to stand up against the juggernaut that was Overwatch and be like, oh, we're not going to do free-to-play. That's not our monetization. We're just going to make it cheap, and then you get the whole game. And then Nerd Slayer, who does a really good Death of a Game series, really hits upon why Lawbreakers just kind of futzed and fizzed and died. And unfortunately, Cliffy B was a major part of that. And Cliffy B sort of wanting to be Relic-ish was a definite part of it. Now with all the backlash against loot boxes and the monetization of free-to-play games, now might have been a better time for Lawbreakers to come out. Overwatch is very much, in its solid form. It's not brand new. It's definitely aged into its early 20s kind of lifespan, and now we have Overwatch 2 coming out. If he was able to sneak Lawbreakers in now, in between Overwatch 1 and 2, I think he'd have a hit. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Quake Champions, along a similar lines to Lawbreakers, definitely deserves a mention here. Quake Champions, again, is one of those arena-style shooters that brings back the old movement of Unreal Tournament and Quake that is just kind of hard to find nowadays. Unless Quake Live is dead. I don't really know if Quake Live is dead or not, but that's one place you could go to it. And then finally, in the decade, the graveyard of the decade, was a game called Keystone, which got renamed at one point. Actually, 2 games. There's another one I have to mention here. So Keystone was a fun game by Digital Extremes. It was a character shooter, a little bit slower paced, a little bit more deliberate, a sort of a Buck Rogers late 1970s sci-fi style to it. Like ray guns that look like Fallout ray guns and everything. The tube with the rocket fins and the little tiny pointy antenna with the ring around it. Interesting game. Died before it really ever came out of Amazing Eternals, or Keystone is how you might know it. Digital Extremes, who was part of the Unreal Tournament games back when, and now does Warframe. That's who was producing it. Sadly, it died. Very interesting game. But that reminded me that a more recent graveyard game that's really sad that it's gone, Gigantic by Motiga. So Gigantic and Overwatch and Paragon and Battleborn all were coming out at around, and Paladins were all coming out at around the same time. Some of them had more MOBA elements than others. Paragon was a MOBA. Battleborn was MOBA-ish. Gigantic was even a little bit lighter on the MOBA elements, but still had some of them, and then Overwatch isn't a MOBA. Gigantic had a very unique, very, very pretty art style to it, sort of, hand-drawn characters, very interesting characters that had a lot of personality that came through how they were animated, how they played, just, by existing, really, sort of like Borderlands characters. And Motiga went through a lot of stuff. They were on their own, and then Microsoft had picked them up, and Microsoft said, okay, but you have to have it on the Xbox One, and you have to be able to put it on the Windows 10 store. And then that fell apart, and then Perfect World picked them up, which is often a kiss of death. It really, Motiga unfortunately had their troubles along the way, and I'm sad the game is no longer playable. It is if you know what you're doing, which I haven't looked into. There is a version of it similar to Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux and City of Heroes, and you could say the WoW Classic servers before there was an official one. There is a way of playing Gigantic a little bit, but I think the best thing to do is follow Project Stamina on Twitter and such, and that is supposedly a spiritual rebirth of Gigantic. So that's it for me, guys. That's what I want to talk about in the decade. Going forward, it's really hard. Cyberpunk going forward is something I'm looking for. Doom Eternal. I would love to see Gigantic come back as Stamina. I would love to see Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux get to a really, really healthy spot. I would love for somebody to pull Visceral out of the dirt and get Dead Space going again. I really feel that my gaming life lacks Dead Space games. I'm very sad that I can't continue to do Dead Space games, and there will never be another one. I know Titanfall kind of lives on for Apex Legends. I would like to see a good Titanfall 3 come out where the multiplayer is good, the single player is good. Final Fantasy VII Remake, I'm looking forward to that. More information continues to leak out on that. We have that second Senua looks interesting. We have Ghost of Tsushima. I'm looking forward to finding out more about that. Neo 2. I can't really say what might span the decade more. It's just 2020 stuff. Shadowlands for World of Warcraft. I'm looking forward to that. Overwatch 2, I don't know enough about to decide on my feeling for it. I mean, I'm going to play it, but I don't know how much I'm looking forward to it. Diablo 4, I am looking forward to it. That Lilith trailer is amazing. And to get a good, fresh experience with that will be fun. Lost Ark, if it finally hits the United States, will be fun. Phantasy Star Online 2, I used to play the original one on my Dreamcast over dial-up way back in the day. PSO 2 could be a lot of fun. Lost Ark 2, or Lost Ark because of its ARPG style game like Diablo and everything. I did play the beta of Path of Exile, but didn't play it much when it went live, so maybe I'm missing out, but Diablo 4 is going to give me my fix, and I do believe Lost Ark, if it ever comes out, will. And, the games I'm probably the most sad died in the decade. Clearly the Dead Space series, as I said. Marvel Avengers Alliance, very much that one. Not as a series, but as a solo game. That's probably my biggest hits out of the graveyard. I could say Evolve a little bit. Gigantic a little bit. Nosgoth and Black Prophecy, even though I mentioned them, they don't mean that much to me that they're in the graveyard. They were worth a mention. Same thing for Black Prophecy, Blacklight Retribution. I would like if those were still around, but it doesn't tear me up inside the way Marvel Avengers Alliance does. Marvel Heroes is worth mentioning as a graveyard. It wasn't one of my games of the decade, but the amount of characters they had, the suits, man, that game was amazing just to look at that game as a closet of Marvel characters and suits and everything like that, costumes. So it's not a game of the decade for me, but it definitely belongs in the graveyard of the decade. That one is sad that it died. I predict Paladins will probably die at some point. Dirty Bomb, which I like on Steam, is considered dead. Actually, let me pop over to Steam real quick. I should throw a nod at Destiny 1 and 2 as games of the decade for me. I'm back into Destiny 2 a little bit more now. I did Destiny 1 most of the way through, including a couple of the expansions, minus actually getting in a clan and raiding. So I do believe I should mention Destiny 1 and 2 as games of the decade for me. Grim Dawn's a fun little ARPG, not really worth mentioning. Agony was a bomb of the decade. That's for sure. This is the old Aliens vs. Predator. This isn't Colonial Marines. There's Axial Verge. Battle Chasers Night War is a fun little RPG. Really good if you can stream Steam onto your mobile devices around the house or whatever. Blood, decades old, but that was fun back in the day. Not Jericho, but Clive Barker's Undying as an old game was really, really fun. Darkstone was fun way back when. The Doom games, let's see. I don't even know why. I have this installed. I don't know that I've played it yet, this Dreadlands beta. I don't even know what it's about. Elite is a throwback to my old Commodore days. I played Elite on the Commodore. Haven't touched it yet, although I know it plays nicely in VR, so I should. Let's see. Grey Goo is considered a very good RTS, but I didn't play it. I do have to throw in for StarCraft Wings of Liberty, the first of the StarCraft 2 3-pack. I did play that one all the way through. I did like that campaign. I didn't really play the others just as much. Iconoclast, I hear, is a good Metroidvania. Haven't played it yet. Lawbreakers, of course, graveyard of the decade, at least for me. Little Nightmares made a splash when it first dropped. Kind of faded quickly. The Messenger's a fun little... If you liked Ninja Gaiden on your Nintendo, your NES, you'll probably like Messenger. Ori played a lot of the Metro series. No, Stalker? No, she played Stalker. She liked that game. She often had to stream it, and we would have to watch her playing the stream because she would get unnerved by it quite a bit. There were some Square flops in there. Onaki was That one set in the Front Mission universe that came out just recently was a huge flop. I'm glad I avoided that one. Prey was considered fairly good. I did like Rage, but I wouldn't consider it a game of the decade for me. Let's see. The Rise of the Triad reboot. Shadow of Mordor was, that was okay. Skullgirl's kind of fun. And Surge is a Dark Souls-esque game that could be interesting. Wolfenstein: The New Order, this was fun, but again, not a game of the decade for me. I was more into it on console. So there you go, guys. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know if there's any super glaring games that I missed. I know there's things like The Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption that should, or 2, Red Dead Redemption 2 that should be on there. I would probably say that my Horizon Zero Dawn and, oh shit. Now I'm gonna brain blank. Nier Automata. Nier Automata and Horizon Zero Dawn, if I were to have started them yet, would probably be on games of the decade. I just haven't started them yet. Not a huge Kingdom Hearts fan. I would imagine Kingdom Hearts 3 would probably be on a lot of people's list. And I find it interesting now, not every WoW expansion makes it for me. It's only 2 out of the entire decade are worth mentioning, because WAD and Biffa and MOP are turds. Watt is a super turd. Biff is, well, that's a story for another day. So there you go, guys. There's me closing out 2019. There's me closing out the decade. And hopefully 2020 will bring us a lot more stuff for us to talk about. So I'm signing off. This really, really should be my last video of the year and of the decade. And come January 1st, new videos should have a new intro and everything. I always like to flip it at the new year, so look for that. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. And Happy New Year.